The next speaker on here is David Dodds, and Dave and I have known each other for a number of years, and he's got 25 years of experience at the interface of chemistry and biology. So pursuing a long-standing ambition, he started or established Dodds and Associates in 2002, where he provides technical consulting and management to startups in the pharma and industrial biotech sector, provides technical diligence to the investment community, expert witness service for patent infringements, serves on technical advisory boards for companies Suchem and Pure Vision, and was a member of a number of other boards in the past as well. Among other current duties, he is CTO for Pronghorn Renewables, a bio-based chemical startup using technologies borrowed from the petrochemical industry. And David pursued a postdoc degree in University of Colorado and did his PhD at the University of Toronto in 1984. And he's a good Canadian that's worked south of the border for almost all his career, if not all of it. David, you take the floor.
All right, some numbers about chemicals and fuels and why we are where we are. These are 2013 numbers, and they're from the US. If you look at the total of US oil consumption and how it is broken down by use, this is what you see. Gasoline, heating oil and diesel fuel, and jet fuel. The fuels are the top three, and they account for 75% of what happens to a barrel of oil when it goes into the economy in the United States. Petrochemical feedstocks account for 2%. Okay, 1/35 of the amount of material. 3% of the same amount of material. Now, the difference between 2013 and 2005 is instructive in that just under a decade, the ratio went from 71% for fuels and 3.5% for chemicals. Most interesting of all is that when it was 71% fuels and 3.5% chemicals, the economic contribution of both those parts, the fuels and the chemicals, was very nearly the same, at just around $360 billion in the US gross domestic product. In less than 10 years, the chemicals have fallen off by about $100 billion. And they've fallen from about 3.5% of that barrel of oil down to 2%. I don't know if you can see these slides. The top slide is the U.S. imports of petrochemical, top curve is U.S. imports of petrochemical feedstocks, and the bottom one is the U.S. Actual domestic production of petrochemical feedstocks. And you'll notice over 30 years, those lines are going down. In the US, we are making and buying less. We are becoming less vertically integrated and leaving money on the table because we are consuming at the very end of the value chain where everybody else captures the value and we pay all the money. So the opportunity is to move back up that value chain into feedstocks and into bio-based chemical feedstocks and get off the fuel kick. Okay, we've got some problems. We've got a lack of champion for chemicals. The U.S. Department of Energy is the Department of Energy. It's very into fuels. The USDA is about growing biomass for any purpose, but it's about growing biomass. There is no Department of Chemicals and Materials. We have a lack of standards. I mentioned this morning. We have one that's fine, that's about how much C14 is in your product, but that's not really enough. We do not yet have good definitions of what things like renewable, sequestered, and bio-based means. In the US, there is really a total lack of policy, and that's a problem. And we have a lack of funding. We have what I call the Uber problem, and this is the Uber problem. A little company that makes an app for hailing taxi cabs just got $1.4 billion of placement, giving it a $17 billion valuation for writing a piece of software. And Avantium just announced a $50 million placement for making a polymer to replace the polyethylene terephthalate that we have drink bottles made from. It's a better polymer, and they were very excited to get $50 million versus $1.4 billion for a piece of software. This is what we're up against when it comes to raising money. We have some operational opportunities for groups like this. Advocacy. We need a champion of bio-based chemicals versus bio-based fuels. And we need to address the lack of policy, I'm afraid I have to say this, by being political and doing some direct lobbying efforts as well. And this is something that an organization can do that small people, startup companies cannot. In fact, this is what organizations should be doing. Do something where the numbers and the size of the organization matter. We need a new paradigm for IP. If I'm a startup, my investors are giving me money to spend on my technology. They're not giving me money to support somebody else's organization and pay license fees. Equity. I've got equity. I can even give you non-dilutable equity. And when I am Google or Microsoft or Uber or somebody else, you will be very glad to have 1 or 2% of my company. You will be very, very well off because of that. So I would suggest that this is something we should be arguing to anybody who's giving us IP, whether it's commercial IP from the private sector or IP from the public sector, from the universities. We should be thinking about asking for equity rather than cash. Cash is not something we've got a lot of. Similarly for incubators. Suffocators, I have heard them called, not incubators, because they take money out of my pocket and I'm waiting to spend money on my organization, not on somebody else's organization. If we could manage that somehow with equity and then ramp up into cash if I spend too long in the incubator, that would be a wonderful thing too. In the US, there are grants. Small Business Initiative research funding is great. It really is. It's free money. It's competitive grants for small industries. Unfortunately, it isn't something that's internationally available, and there simply isn't enough. But look at this as a model for the way to spread money around competitively to technology and actually keep it out of the university's hands. There are other FOAs, funding opportunity announcements from all different agencies all over the US, many of which allow foreign contractors. This would be something for an advocacy group or this group here to look upon and act as a clearinghouse for opportunities for moving money back and forth across the border. The other thing that I'm going to close with this comment, and you can look at the rest of the slides yourselves, is that writing a grant is hard work, not because of the technology that I have to explain. It's for all the other stuff that I've got to do, all the other paperwork about I don't have a lobby group, and I do have a lobby group, and the money's coming from here, and it's going to get spent somewhere else, and this and that and the next thing, and where my health and safety plan is, and my data management plan. If there were a group that could take care of that, and as a consortia provide me with that information as a small company, so all I have to do is worry about describing my technology in my grant or funding application, and all of this other stuff we're taking care of, that would be enormously valuable. Thank you for your time.